Welcome to In the Black, the podcast that shines a light on resilience, transformation, and the power of reinvention. I am Araceli, and each week, my co host Shannon and I sit down with incredible women who have faced some of life's hardest challenges, from personal setbacks to societal obstacles, and have emerged on the other side stronger, driven, and ready to make a difference.
On In the Black, we celebrate these stories of strength and success, diving deep into the journeys of women who turn pain into purpose, adversity into action, and now dedicate themselves to making the world a better place in their own way. They're here to inspire, share hard-earned wisdom, and remind us that no matter how dark things may seem, life is cyclical and dawn is coming. So whether you're looking for inspiration, motivation, or just a reminder that change is always possible, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to In the Black.
Welcome, Darbi Keene. Wow, no us. Let's do that again. Welcome, Darbi Keene, to the podcast. Darbi is a Missouri-based therapist and the founder of Walking with Wildflowers, a private practice dedicated to serving neurodivergent teens and adults, LGBTQ plus individuals, and those navigating chronic illness. She specializes in helping clients break generational cycles, explore their identities, and find meaningful ways to thrive rather than just survive. With a focus on neurodivergence, she provides compassionate therapy and autism assessments for adults, creating an affirming space for those who often feel overlooked or misunderstood. As a late diagnosed autistic and ADHD human herself, she brings a deeply personal and empathetic lens to her work, helping clients embrace their unique strengths by working with their brains rather than against them. Beyond her therapy practice, she's passionate about fostering Beyond her therapy practice, she's passionate about fostering affirming work cultures. Her long-term vision includes building a consulting business to support organizations with inclusive business policies, staff training, and keynote speaking. Her journey is an inspiring blend of professional expertise and lived experience, making her an insightful advocate for both personal and systematic change. Welcome, Darbi, to our podcast.
Hello, hello. I'm so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. So introduce yourself. Tell us a little about who you are right now, what you're doing.
So, I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Missouri. I work with folks all over Missouri. Recently, I say recently, I'm coming up on almost 2 years now in private practice, which is kind of insane to me. So I have kind of found the intersectionality that I really wish I could have found in decades of trying to find a therapist that understood the nuance of a lot of the different challenges that I had, which teenage years was undiagnosed neurodivergence, but a lot of other things along the way too. And I just found that there was not really access to services, at least that I could find, that I felt like were affirming and supportive of the different intersectionalities of who I am. And so just noticing that major gap and also just finding that those people are my people, like when it comes to clients, it's just a wonderful mixture of empowerment and support. And I am just absolutely thrilled that I get to be a part of people's journey and discovering um, that neurodivergence, chronic illness, whatever it is that's present, isn't a life ender. It's just a matter of figuring out a different way to go down this path, figuring out how to self accommodate, figuring out how to challenge a lot of the societal beliefs, norms, and pressures that unfortunately do create those systems of systemic shame. And so, yeah, that I love that I get to be a part of that. I love that this is a population of folks who I feel like often don't get a lot of representation or affirmation or support. And so I'm just thrilled to get to talk about how incredibly wonderful these people can be, but also like how inspiring they are for me, and then also kind of what my own struggles were that led to me deciding that this was my purpose, my passion to work with.
And for our listeners, could you clarify or explain to the listeners what neurodivergence is?
Absolutely, such a good question. Um, so neurodivergence is somewhat of an umbrella term. It kind of encapsulates a lot of different things. Neurodivergence just meaning that the way that our brains are wired, the way that our brains work and function is a little bit divergent from what the typical or what people might call neurotypical, meaning not neurodivergent, and how they are able to yeah, so neurodivergence being an umbrella term for primarily in the way that I see it in my own practice is typically like ADHD, autism, OCD, some learning disabilities and processing disorders. But there are lots of things that technically qualify as neurodivergence beyond just ADHD and autism.
I love that. In 2013, I had a brain injury, which led to some executive functioning issues and things that I had never experienced as a challenge previously. And so having someone out there who understands those challenges is amazing. Now, growing up undiagnosed, can you take us back to a pivotal moment when you faced a significant challenge with this? What was happening in your life? How did that impact you? How did that change your perspective on things?
Yeah, so I was one of those kids that was really, really fortunate in having like what I think a lot of people would look at as like picture perfect family. Like my parents have been married for, gosh, almost 30 years at this point, I think. They were both present in the home. All of my basic needs were cared for. Like all of the environmental things were right. And yet somehow that didn't necessarily change how wrong I felt. So even with all of this love, this support, like my parents were the first on board to go, "Oh, you want therapy? Beautiful. Let's go find somebody that works well, that can maybe help you with these things." And so it was always really, really conflicting for me to have environmentally this, I mean, I can't have asked for a better environment to grow up in, but then to know that every system outside of that, whether it was school, whether it was work when I was a teenager, whether it was social relationships as a system, like none of those things ever worked right for me. And it felt like, I mean, I talk with clients all the time about how for a lot of us who are neurodivergent, it just literally feels like someone forgot to give us the guidebook on how to human or how to live amongst the rest of these people, because somehow, whether it's called out directly or not, like we know that we are different somehow. And so when you don't really have something to explain that, you don't do anything but turn around and internalize all of that. So, um, as a teenager, I struggled really, really badly with self injury, self harm. I spent, I don't even know how many years of my life in either therapy or inpatient programs, things like that. And it was always like really big piece of shame for me because like I said, why is this happening? Why am I doing this when essentially everything is great and wonderful, and like kind of that internalized shame of, well, other people have it so much worse, so why can't I just get this piece under control? Like I could see the emotional strain that it put on my parents. I could see the financial burden of how outrageously expensive inpatient or like higher levels of care are. And then, of course, it was worse because I grew up in the boonies essentially to where we had to drive like a solid two and a half hours to really have access to any decent services for the most part. I mean, very, very rural community. And so like self-harm was something that I don't think my parents like even I don't whether they knew it existed or not, like it was one of those things where I don't I don't think that they ever imagined that someone like me who presents on the outside is typically like very joyous and bubbly and kind of quirky and all over the place. Inside was just a massive like pit of self-loathing, of frustration, of resentment towards myself, towards not being able to just get a handle on my self-harm. Um, and so I think that was one of the really beautiful things for me about coming to learn that I was autistic, um, was that self-harm element all of a sudden made so much sense to me. Like, instead of trying to wonder why, everyone else around me was this beautiful horse and I'm this random zebra that's trying so hard to fit into this group and be like everyone else and do the things that I'm supposed to do. I think coming to realize with my diagnosis oh geez, this was again about 2 years ago, that I was diagnosed, like had already become a mother at that point. Um, and that diagnosis really helped me understand that part of myself a lot better. Like it wasn't just about self-harming to self-harm. When I was able to go back and look in hindsight at those moments, it was pain-seeking stimming for me in a lot of cases, and now that's something that I have a word for, that I can work with clients on harm reduction techniques or how to access pain-seeking stimming in a safer way that's not as harmful to your body. For me, that was also a way of realizing again, hindsight is 2020, but looking back at my teenage years and my young adult years of like realizing that getting to the point of where I would have these really, really bad self-harming episodes, the only way I could ever describe it in therapy or even to my parents once they found out was like I would just get to a point where I could feel literally nothing anymore, like numbness internally, externally in my brain, just now knowing the word dissociation and derealization, depersonalization, things like that. But knowing that what was actually happening in those moments is that I had hit a complete stage of autistic burnout, that it was not panic attacks, it wasn't a depression that couldn't be treated by literally any of the medications on the market. It was internal. It was shutdown, it was meltdown, it was burnout. And those things from a nervous system place are much different in some ways than depression symptoms or, things like that. And so I think receiving my diagnosis, even much later in life, like I would have loved to have known this about myself much earlier. Things probably would have been a bit easier. But I think that even the value of having that answer now as an adult is one, I can look back in hindsight and remove some of that internalized shame that came from all of those situations in my past. But I can also now use that information to intervene with my own self when I start to notice, like, if I start having thoughts about that again, I am able to check in with myself and go, okay, this isn't coming from nowhere. We are approaching a place that we have been before, that we've known before. We've got to take a step back and see like what else is happening. And it almost never fails that when I do take that step back and kind of check in a little bit more, it's usually that I am like bordering a meltdown. And that is my brain essentially going, okay, we've got to get this out. And so pain seeking stimming seems to be a good way to do it. But now I'm able to kind of step in and either use less harmful methods, or I can stim in different ways, or I can ask for help. I can ask for co regulation. Now that I know what is actually happening for myself, that's something that I can then communicate to my support people around me as well. Whereas when I was a teenager and couldn't explain it any more than, well, I just don't feel anything. I needed to know I was still alive and could feel something. Now I have a much clearer understanding of what that was for me.
That's beautiful. So, for some of our listeners who might be experiencing something similar, when you talk about pain seeking stimming, and you said there was another word that I didn't know either, um, co regulation.
Mhm.
Can you kind of identify or define those for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, stimming for neurodivergent people is typically like a physical way of getting out like internalized anxiety or discomfort. It's a way for our nervous system to kind of regulate itself to come down from like a really escalated state of being. Whether that's being overstimulated, overwhelmed, feeling like really, really intense or volatile emotions. Stimming for a lot of us can also just be very self soothing and comfortable. And so, unfortunately, the media representation of stimming typically involves like really, really drastic movements of, hand flapping and spinning and things like that. And that absolutely can be really, really healthy stimming for a lot of people. But for a lot of people, that's not necessarily the type of stimming that they need. Or, we already have this huge internalized shame about being perceived by other people as it is. So a lot of us come to learn really early on how to stim in a way that is not as noticeable or that isn't picked up as easily as being something different or other than. And so for me, pain seeking stimming is all about like proprioceptive input, which is the way that our body kind of figures out how we are in relation to the space around us. And what can end up happening is with another term I'll pop out there, alexithymia, which is often a symptom of various mental diagnosis, not just neurodivergence, but alexithymia being a symptom of not being able to identify emotions, like whether that be not knowing what the internal cues looks like for certain things, or just feeling so overwhelmed and numbed out by various emotions that our bodies and brains just kind of shut down and can't necessarily identify or name what's happening. And so, pain seeking stimming is a way of providing that proprioceptive input to our body. Unfortunately, until we find more body safe ways of doing that, a lot of us end up doing that through means of self harm, through means of hitting ourselves, pulling our hair, scratching at our skin. It can look like punching walls. It can look like things that might look outwardly aggressive, but in reality, what's happening is we are trying to receive that input through the use of pain, through the use of bringing that proprioceptive input to our bodies so that we can kind of cling and ground ourselves with it almost. So in session, we talk a lot about various ways of doing that without creating physical harm. So, like popping a rubber band on your wrist, for example, or like I've got a whole treasure trove of um, different sensory tools that I'll go through with clients. Like you can get the occupational therapist little rollers that have the little soft silicone spikes to where when you roll it, you're getting that spiky input, but it's not actually creating long-lasting harm to your body. And then co-regulation just being like, if I myself am not able to regulate and bring my nervous system kind of back to a baseline to where I don't feel like really escalated, co-regulation simply just means I'm tapping in somebody else to kind of step in and sit in that with me. That's not to say I even necessarily need them to do anything. Sometimes I just need to know that I am not alone in that moment and that there is somebody there that can take my hand and walk through that distressing moment with me and help me come out the other side through it.
When someone is stemming and you're talking about giving them other non-harmful ways to stem, how do you get a person that is, used to hitting walls and feeling that sensation to then now find a less harmful sensation that's going to result in the same feeling or that same.
Yeah, of meeting whatever the need is that's being communicated through that. Absolutely. So that's where we might talk about like, what do you get from that? Which can feel like a really vulnerable and shameful question to ask, but it's absolutely not. Like, self-harm or pain-seeking stemming in whatever form it's coming out is a means of communicating a need. And so whether that is a need for self-punishment, whether that is a need for having that proprioceptive input, whether that is a need of needing other people to connect and notice that they are crying out for help in that way. For some people, it's a very, very private experience, and you would never know that that is something that they struggle with. And so for a lot of people, it's kind of figuring out what is the need. I have worked with clients who the need was purely visual. They needed to actually see the result of the harm, whether that was through blood or scratches. And so we work through that by allowing them to still have that through the use of a red marker, of using the red marker, of focusing on the cold sensation of it across whatever part of their body they might have normally sought out to harm. And so maybe for someone else, the need is purely something to ground them because they might feel so lost in that meltdown or so lost in that shutdown that they don't even know how to bring themselves back to earth, is what it can feel like sometimes. That dissociation can just be so heavy. And so that pain seeking stimming may come from a way of like just needing to bring their awareness back into their body. And so we talk about ways of doing that that aren't as harmful. So, like I mentioned earlier, squeezing the little oh, I wish I knew the name for them. But the little prickly balls, you can get the little kids' round balls that have like the little spikes on them just for texture. It might look like rolling it between their hand. It might look like squeezing the ball as hard as they can, rolling their foot over it. Um, for some people, that sensory need is something that we can find a physical outlet for. So, getting into a karate class where you are able to give and receive that particular type of input in a way that is safe and monitored and regulated. Um, I mean, their temperature, we talk about temperature all of the time in session. For some people, they really enjoy or really hate extreme temperatures, cold or hot. So, working with them to find out what is soothing, we can talk about like dipping your face into a cold bowl of ice water is not very pleasant at all. A lot of people would consider that to be a painful, though temporary experience. But we know that there is a lot of benefit from that too, in terms of how it soothes our central nervous system, how the diver's response from that can help bring our heart rate back into a healthy rhythm and help regulate our nervous system to kind of come back to a baseline. So yeah, just kind of having the open and courageous conversation, the non-shaming conversation of tell me what you get from this and let's figure out if there's a different way that you can still have that need met that doesn't bring about potential natural consequences, whether that be scarring, which can affect your self-esteem, or, health-wise, infection, or using a substance that's creating harm in your body. partnering with them and figuring out what is the actual need and how can we meet it in a safer, healthier way.
I love that. I love that there are options and that there are actual solutions to some of those things. Um, Now, I'm just curious, jumping back to your own personal story. I know that there were probably moments where you felt like giving up, as you were going through the process and you weren't diagnosed and you were feeling all of these things. What do you think you did to kind of get through that? And now, looking back, what do you think you could have done differently um, in that journey?
That's a really hard one for me because, like, I look back in hindsight, and if I'm being gentle with myself, like, I was a teenager who was, honest about what I was experiencing. My parents, my mom, my dad were incredibly supportive of, going to different specialists. I had a lot of chronic health issues as a teenager as well, which resulted in like having a major back surgery my freshman, sophomore year of high school. Um, and so I think a big piece of it for me was the support of the people around me that kept me going. It was kind of always the promise of, well, if this doesn't work, we will just find the next thing. Like, if this isn't the answer, we're not going to give up till we figure out what it was. And so I was just really fortunate to have people in my life who were in tune with whether I was okay or not, who cared if I was okay or not, who weren't afraid to ask the hard question of like, are you feeling depressed? Are you having thoughts of self-harm? Like, those are questions that we don't have to be scared of asking, because when we ask those questions, we're letting the other person know, like, I care enough about you that I want to know if there is something that I can do to help support you if you are experiencing those really scary thoughts.
When you were talking back about how everyone around you was a horse and you were a zebra, could you talk about a few instances that made you feel that way and bring us more into detail about what separated you or made you feel like you were different from everybody else? And then if your classmates knew that this was happening or if this was kept secret and then your parents were helping you um, outside of their knowing.
Yeah, so it was a journey for sure. I started self-harming when I was probably in 7th or 8th grade, which is also around the time that a lot of my chronic health issues started up. And so I think that, like, in hindsight, that was just really, really an overwhelming time for me, both emotionally, mentally, physically, everything. Um, I think that my classmates probably knew that I struggled. I really, really enjoy creative writing. And unfortunately, a lot of the writing that I did in my English classes, like, was very morbid and macabre, like, looking back at it. But I mean, that's how I felt internally at that time. Like, it felt like there was nothing good or positive to look forward to because of the sensation of knowing that, like, this was how I was always gonna feel, or at least it felt like that at the time, made it really, really difficult to feel like it was worth putting a lot of investment into myself anyways. But yeah, I so in junior high, I started dating a guy that, I ended up, like, puppy love, high school, like, everyone thought we were gonna be the high school sweethearts that we dated for way too long. But, like, looking back in hindsight, I realized that a lot of the choices I made in what friendships I would try to seek out or what relationships I would get into and stay into for way too long all came back to a place of always feeling like I was never good enough, like I didn't fit into any of the groups at school, the cliques, the whatever. Like, even when I was really good at something in school, like, it felt like I still wasn't, not that I needed the accolades and celebration for it, but, like, it was very, very noticeable when other people would group up and congratulate each other and tell you, what a great job you did and how it was so funny when you did this one thing. And the only people that I had at the end of that were my parents and my grandparents and whoever else came to support me in my theater show. And I remember this relationship that I was in for so long. I really feel like I stayed in it because it was the only social connections I had. Like, I didn't really have a best friend through a lot of school. It was this boy and his group of guy friends, which I wasn't into any of the things that they were into, but man, I sure tried to force it and pretend like I was to feel like I could be like just part of a group, period. I just wanted to belong to somebody somewhere. And when we ended up breaking up, like the very beginning of senior year, um, I remember realizing that, like, oh shit, this wasn't just losing a boyfriend. Like, this was losing every social connection I felt like I had my senior year of high school, like the hardest year undoubtedly of school. And I just lost everything all in one moment. And so I remember, like, uh, my drama teacher, Miss Bosenko, is just the most incredible human, quirky, could not give a heck about what anybody else thought about her, and I just admired that so much. But that also made her, like, come across as a very safe person for me also. And so that was something that, like, as I got older and I worked in the school systems before my private practice and things like that, like, I always wanted to be the Miss Bosenko for other people. Um, but like in my senior year, losing literally every social connection I had, having no one, but still like having to go to high school every day and do my thing, I would just eat lunch with her in her classroom every day in my senior year, basically, because I didn't feel like I had anybody. I didn't belong to any groups, even the groups that I was a part of, like drama and student council, and like all of these things that I was doing, which was way over pushing myself. But like even within those groups that I tried really hard to like put in the effort, right? And get out and do the things and sign up for this and sign up for that. And yet I just was always in the background. Like it never really felt like I actually truly belonged, was welcomed or wanted in any of those spaces.
I definitely understand how that goes. I have a neurodivergent child, and actually I pulled them out to homeschool them not too long ago. And I guess it's been 3 years now.
Mm,
Just goes by really fast. But it was incredibly challenging. And so I think it's beautiful that you had your parents as support people. But
yeah.
I know how hard it is when it's not your peers,
Mhm.
and not from a firsthand perspective, but from that secondhand perspective of the parent. And I love that you want to be Miss Paseko, was it?
Miss Bosenko, yes, she was like 5 foot nothing, kind of just gave no cares about the world or how people perceived her. Like she knew she was weird and quirky and that kids made fun of her, and she just fed off of it. Like that was power to her, and I remember just like always admiring that.
That's awesome. So, in light of her memory, what advice would you give to kids who are kind of experiencing that same thing? Like, since you obviously have seen it, where she was quirky and she was totally herself, and then
Mm,
you going through what you've gone through, and I would assume learning to accept you and how your brain works, according to what you said earlier.
mm.
Um, so, is there anything that you wish you had known earlier in your journey that might help one of those kids or someone that's on a similar path right now?
I think that there is so much like pressure to be a part of something, even if it's not your something. I know that one of the things that really helped me as a teenager, even though I never really felt like I belonged in the spaces per se, was getting engaged in activities that did feel good and feel right for me. So, like as a teenager, my parents were really supportive of the fact that I like to sing. And so even though it was more of an individualized activity of like going and doing these singing competitions every year. And, you've got regional, state, and national. So we always knew come summertime, we were going on our trip for that. And, um, like as a young person or as the support person of a young person, if you can find a passion or what might often be referred to as like a special interest in the neurodivergent world, if you can find that passion for them, do whatever you can to enrich it, to fulfill it, to satisfy that need, because that may be the one thing for that person that is making life worth continuing. Of just like, if they want to go show dogs, if they want to, own every encyclopedia that there is about the various types of dinosaurs, and they want to sit down and tell you who would win in a fight between this dinosaur and that dinosaur, like that is the neurodivergent person's way of showing you love, of showing you care, of showing you that they want to engage with you and that they are trying to form that connection. For me, it was singing, it was animals. As an adult, I figured out ways of like combining the different things that I loved as a child. So, for a couple of seasons, I was on a competitive karaoke league in Kansas City, which was incredible. One of those seasons was a gimmick season where we actually did like dress up and we had props and we would come up with skits to go along with the song that we sang. And then I transitioned from that and decided that like, okay, I really enjoy the like that's one of the things I loved about theater. And I feel like half of the kids' theater kids probably are neurodivergent, whether they know it or not. But like, it was just so incredible to be another person for a while. Like, my whole life was so heavy with masking who I really was, like putting on this social camouflage to try and be perceived less or not be pointedly as different than my peers. It's a protective factor, a defense mechanism for some. And so, like, being in the acting theater, just being a character and not being myself for a little while can feel so incredibly freeing for me because I get to just not have to be so in my head and I can just lose my brain to being another person for a little while. So like took a break from competitive karaoke and have been in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign for, several months now where I play this super quirky, like empowering but yet emotional mess of a chaotic human being, or not human being. Technically, I'm a wood elf druid, but it's just like this really important experience of finding the things that help you connect to either other people or yourself. And knowing that there's not a wrong way to go about it. Like if meeting up with people in person does not feel organic or comfortable for you, online friends are 100% friendships, like they are social connections. And so if your best friend is an Xbox Live buddy that you play a game with 3 nights a week, beautiful, that's a friendship. If your social connections are a group of 5 other weirdos playing a D&D campaign once a week, those are friendship, those are your weirdos. And so like for me, weirdo has kind of become like a really empowering term because I know what I am. Like, I know what I am. I know how I come across. I know how people can perceive me in a lot of circumstances. But so this is one of those cursing moments that I asked about earlier. I'll never forget, like, it was not long after I had returned home from one of my first inpatient stays for self harm. Um, and standing outside with my dad, who is like this big burly man, doesn't really show emotions very often, is very like direct and to the point. And I remember like having this conversation with him about like I don't know how to move past this. Like I don't know what to do next. And he was like, "Well, I think the greatest life advice I could ever give you is sometimes you just have to learn how and when to say fuck it because it doesn't matter that much. It's not that important. It's not that serious." And so I think for a lot of myself, it's been like just trying to discover what those moments are of, okay, F it. What do I care if people think my green hair is strange? I've actually gotten lots of compliments on my hair since making this choice, which was the opposite of what my anxious brain was telling me was going to happen if I did start to embrace my authentic self a little bit more. So taking those risks, but taking them slowly and at your own pace. And, it doesn't mean you have to jump straight out there and get a full back tattoo. Like we can start small with changing our hair or trying a different makeup style or, wearing clothes that feel more comfortable rather than what other people think looks professional. I mean, it's just a matter of figuring out ways of self accommodation and how to keep the passions and things that are important to you, like surrounding yourself with those things.
Okay, I have really enjoyed this. I think we could probably talk for hours, and I may follow up with you outside of the
I,
podcast.
I was going to say, like, neurodivergence is my special interest. So please, by all means, I could talk for hours and hours.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on here, and we do have a couple of closing questions. So the first one, in the black, is kind of it's a financial term that means being in the positive. And so we like to hear stories of people who have been in the red, who have been in the negative, and they've turned that around and made it into something positive. So when you think of your life now and you think of being in the black, what does that mean to you personally in like one sentence?
Hmm. One sentence is hard for an autistic because, man, we've got stuff to say. I think for me, it's like coming to recognize that I am needed in the world. Like not in a selfish way, but like I and other neurodivergent folks, like LGBTQ folks, people who struggle with chronic illness, all of these different intersectionalities that make us feel different and less than. It's a journey of figuring out all of the ways in which you're actually better than. Like, there are so many strengths and so many parts of myself that if I didn't have as much struggle and sadness or loneliness as they might have brought me at other points in my life, they've also brought me like a profound sense of purpose and a profound sense of connection. And yeah, just I love being able to use my own personal experience to have a little bit better understanding of the nuance of all of those different intersectionalities to where people aren't having to do what I did, which was go in and educate my therapist before I could even begin. Like I wanted a therapist that, and I realize I'm about 10 or 12 sentences in now, not just one. So I apologize. But yeah, just like knowing that people can come into a space that already feels safe and welcoming, and you're not going to be judged. You're going to be believed no matter how outrageous the thought to yourself might feel. Like, I get the nuance of a lot of that. I get the feeling like your thoughts don't make sense and like the world doesn't make sense. And so yeah, just the journey of getting to take that struggle and pain that I went through to try to lessen what others might have to experience has been incredibly honoring for me to be a part of.
I love that so much. Well, lastly, where can our listeners find you?
So my website is probably the best, which is just www.walkingwithwildflowers.com. It is my primary therapeutic page. Clients can go and see all of the various things that I specialize in. I do all of my sessions virtually, so I like fully believe in coming as you are in whatever space feels most comfortable, safe, cozy, like whatever environment. And so I really try to be authentic on my website about what you are getting as a therapist if you decide that you want to work with me, but also like just the different ways in which we can work together. Like it's not just all talk therapy, tell me what made you feel that way. Like It's about building systems. It's about building support networks. It's about understanding your internal world a little bit better and knowing how to make sense of that. So, yeah, website is definitely the best. All of my additional contact information is on my website. And then I also have a page where folks can fill out to have a free consultation to ask me questions and determine if they feel like I would be a good fit for what they're looking for. I think that it's important that people get to have a glimpse of that before committing to that. So I offer that through my website as well.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you coming on In the Black today. And for all of our listeners out there, I hope that today's story left you feeling inspired and reminded of the incredible strength that lies within every single one of us. Darbi has taken her toughest challenges and transformed them into something beautiful, showing us that even in the darkest moments, there's always a way to bring light to the world.
If you've enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe and share In the Black with another woman who could use a little encouragement. Together, we're building a community of passion, purpose, and power. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and remember, your story matters. Your choices change things, and being your most authentic self can and will change the world around you. Thank you so much for coming on today's podcast. We look forward to, we should just reschedule you for more.
I am down anytime. Like I said, I could talk about this all day long. A list of topics I could talk to you. This was awesome. Thank you for letting me be a part of your passion project. This is incredible. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really excited about it. So I'm glad that it has been so far. I feel like a lot of women have responded and said, yes, this is something that is needed. And
Yeah.
it's pretty fun. So, but I really appreciate you. And I actually I'm in the Kansas City area also. And so
Awesome.
I might be connecting with you here in the near future. Did I find you on
Yeah,
Innovate Her?
absolutely.
Is that how you found us?
I cannot remember if it was Innovate Her or if it was a different group that I was in, but it was definitely something you posted in a group, yes. And
Okay.
I've actually done Innovate Her's focus panel for neurodivergence a couple of years ago. So
Okay,
it was
very cool.
that it would make sense if that was where I found it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I've got to run, guys. Thank you so much again. Thanks, Araceli,
No,
for
thank
putting
you.
everything together. You guys have a good day.
Awesome.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye. Yes, I wanted to hear more about, people's grounding and how you change that. And, because I've heard of hair pulling, and I was like,
Mhm.
how do you take someone from hair pulling to them doing something completely different? Because I feel like that's so, it must be like the pain of it or something. I don't know, but it was super cool.
So trichotillomania is what you're describing, hair pulling. Dermatillomania is skin picking. But yeah, both of those things. And that's where it can get a little bit tricky because sometimes those things are pain-based stimming. Sometimes, though, they are body-focused repetitive behaviors. And so you do have to kind of look at them a little bit differently. That's why I say that communication piece of like, what are you getting from this? It is serving some type of a need. It is helping you with something. Let's figure out what that something is. And then we can explore and be curious about other ways of possibly meeting that.
That is so awesome. I was going to ask about how you got into, obviously, I don't know if I can piece this together and throw it in the podcast,
Mhm.
um, but how you went from feeling this and like knowing there was a need, and when you saw the therapist, you were educating her. So was that the point of getting you into going into like getting your degree in this, or getting yourself more educated in this so that you can go and help others? Like, I wanted to ask you during.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I originally went to school for nursing. I wanted to be a nurse just like my mom. I love medical anything is another special interest of mine. Um, but then realized that I really did not like chemistry. Couldn't pass chemistry to save my life. And that was a requirement. But what I actually ended up finding out is that the piece of nursing that I liked most was actually like the mental health piece of nursing. And so I changed my major a couple of times, but then when I was actually in a 30-day inpatient program based out of St. Louis, um, it was finding out that the LCSWs that I was working with that were like helping me in that program of realizing that, oh, this is actually what I want to do. Like I want other people to feel as safe as I felt in that space to talk about these really hard things and to like get rid of shame by speaking aloud about it and working with one another and providing the moment of feeling like it was okay to talk about things that never felt okay to talk about, like even in previous therapy. And so I left that particular program, which was a specialty program for self harm. And so knowing that, like, oh, I can be a therapist, but I don't have to be like the super stiff, sterile, like therapy that you see on TV. Like I can choose the population that I work with. I can choose if there is a specialty that I want to work with, like self-harm or working with the LGBTQ community or whatever these different niches are, like coming to a point of realizing that I could provide that, but I can do it in a way that feels right and empowering for me too, not just tell me how that makes you feel. Like that's so stiff and it doesn't feel welcoming or empowering to me. And having had that experience with the therapist that really helped me in that program, I ended up coming back because I dropped out of college at that point to go into that 30-day program, lost all of my academic scholarships, everything. And yeah, went back to school, changed my major to social work. And day one in that social work 101 class, where they were talking about like, as social workers, we meet clients where they are and then go from there. I was like, oh yeah, perfect. This is where I'm supposed to be. Like that was the first time in my educational journey where I really felt like, okay, I'm on the right path now. This is what I'm supposed to do.
That's awesome. So you switched your whole major, went into social work, got the degree in that, and then you went and took specialty training to be able to do what you're doing in
Yeah,
here.
so the way that our licensure works is you have to take an additional board exam to be a clinical social worker, which allows you to like give therapeutic practices. You have to go through several years of supervision where someone else is kind of like checking in, checking your work, doing case studies with you, things like that. And so, yeah, once I got past that point, and then after having my daughter, realized that what I really want to, I mean, it's been a goal of mine to have a private practice for a while. I just didn't know that it was possible to do it in the manner that I am, like with the flexibility that I have to have to self accommodate my autism and chronic illness, and being able to do it virtually and not having to like have a lot of the executive functioning pieces that might be required if I were to like work with someone else or work within an agency or like I find that the way in which I have adapted my practice is a self-accommodation to myself in allowing me because there is a very small percentage of autistic folks who actually are able to work or work full time. And so I consider this particular setup of my business just another form of accommodating myself and my needs to be able to both work but also still have a life where I can take off if I wake up and I'm in the middle of a shutdown, or the flexibility of not having so many clients that I'm overwhelmed and overloaded. Just making sure that all of the various parts of my life, my business, my everything is meant to fit me and what I have to have.
That's awesome. So where would someone who may think they have autism or something that, they've kind of know but never gotten diagnosed, where do people go for that? Like,
So as a child, it's a little bit easier because that's primarily what you're going to find in terms of assessors is for children's, like Children's Mercy and other places like that, in the Missouri area anyways. However, that was part of the issue I ran into when I determined that I wanted to have an assessment for myself was I could not find providers for quite some distance who were even willing to assess adults because there's this belief that if you went your whole life without being, pegged as autistic or flagged as autistic, then there's no way that you're an adult who is autistic because you would have had to have that, like it would have been noticeable, and that's not always true. We're finding at high rates that people assigned female at birth are missed for diagnosis at like extremely high rates compared to males. And so there are a lot of us who are just now reaching adulthood and realizing that there may be answers to the questions we've had for our entire life. Like there may be explanations as to why everything feels so freaking hard all of the time. And like I'm a big believer in having to name it to tame it. But if you don't know what to name it, like where do you go from there? And so, yeah, I myself offer adult autism assessments just because I did see the gap in services in the area. But aside from that, if you are looking to use an insurance panel, the easiest thing to do, honestly, would just be to search providers through your insurance. If you are an adult looking for assessment, it may be a little more difficult. If you are looking for an assessment for a minor, you can often find those services through hospitals or even pediatricians' offices typically have a list of providers that will assess.
do you only assess autism or do you assess ADHD and other
Mhm.
things?
Yeah,
Okay.
so I fully diagnose within my practice. I don't always believe that diagnosis is necessary depending on the case. But yes, I offer autism and ADHD assessments for adults only.
That's awesome. Well, I might have to look you up later down the road.
Give me a call. The free consultation page is on the website.
I was like, oh wow, grounding. I think I do that because somebody else. I did the EMDR, whichever it's called, and I told her
Yeah.
things that I do, and I thought it was self harm, and she's like, no, that's grounding.
Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've been here with my little Neato ball, squeezing it in my palm the entire podcast. So I mean, anything that I sit cross-legged as a way of grounding myself to where I'm not bouncing all of the time because I know that that can be kind of distracting, especially in a circumstance like this. But yeah, under the table, I've got something going all of the time.
Okay, well that explains why I need something too. I'm like, okay, maybe I need to go see what's wrong with me
Well,
or
just
different about me, not wrong.
you can just come look in this box of goodies I have. I have like every STEM toy in the world. My absolute favorite I keep on my desk right here. These are my emotional support mushrooms,
Oh,
and they
fun.
have faces. So yeah, I keep some form of STEM toy basically anywhere in my house and different types because they serve different purposes. So
Yeah.
experimenting to find what works well for you.
Yes. I have a ring that I twirl around and then
Yep.
other
I
things,
have
but I and always end up going back to my grounding that the other lady told me I did. But she didn't give me a thing to change it. We didn't tap on that.
mm,
I was there for a different thing. I just said,
got
"Hey,
it.
do this," and I think it's harming myself. And she's like, "No, that's grounding, and that's good that
Mm.
you're doing it and that you do it privately." But yeah, so interesting because I learned so much today, and I had so many questions.
Yeah,
So
I mean, that's the thing is people just don't talk about it. Like we see autism as the picture that it is in the media, which is so ridiculous most of the time and inaccurate, but and stigmatizing. But yeah, we just don't like pain-seeking stimming is not something to be shameful of. It's just something that we find. I mean, everybody has challenges with everything. It's just a matter of how we cope with them or the ways in which we approach them. And but if we don't feel comfortable having those vulnerable conversations because they don't feel safe to have because they feel shaming, we don't ever find out the information. We're just stuck there being upset and miserable and whatever else when there's access to that information. If people would just be more open to having the hard conversations. If internalized shame was not a thing, one, I probably wouldn't have a job, but I wouldn't be too upset about that. But like if internalized shame was not as big as it is, like I feel like the world would be so much better because we would just talk about these things instead of holding them in. Like we would openly talk about the things that bring us shame because then that's how other people can go, oh no, you're not alone in that. Like I do that too. Or no, have you ever tried this? Because like I had never thought about a solution to this, but then I tried this and it really helped. And until we can break out of that shame and have those conversations, we just kind of stay stuck in that place. And so that's kind of what I hope for overall as my purpose, I think, is just to help people know that they don't have to feel stuck, that there are other things, other ways, other journeys, other paths, but you don't have to feel stuck. It's just a matter of talking about the stuckness and naming it and taming it.
That's awesome, which kind of touches on why we decided to do the podcast to share stories of, you know, trauma or hardships or
Yeah.
past that is usually shameful to speak about, but giving the people the platform and then, helping them share how they got out of that and how they are changing people's lives, such as yourself. So,
Well, thank you. Yeah, I all of the women you've had on your episodes so far have just been incredible, and I'm really honored to get to be amongst them. So,
well,
oh,
thank you for being a part of it, especially at the very beginning and trusting us to portray your story on our podcast and on our
yeah,
Instagram. So hopefully we do, you justice. And thank you for applying and, being interested
yeah,
in healing. So
thank you. Any idea roughly how long before the episode is put up
next
or
Wednesday.
published? Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. I will be looking for that.
Okay. Well, you'll find a little snippet on it on around Tuesday. Um, And then once I actually put in my 2 weeks notice, so once I do that, I can go full time and try to, you know
Oh, that's exciting.
yeah, put out content on, Monday, Tuesday, and consistently. I think right now it's been challenging with both of us working full time
I
to
can't
then,
imagine.
yes, do this, and we're kind of dropping the ball on, like, posting and time and all that stuff. The only saving grace for me is being able to schedule the release of the podcast so it's ready, on
Mm-hmm.
Spotify. So that's been great. So that's been consistent. So hopefully in about 2 weeks there'll be more consistency. But yeah, yours will air the next week because we just had the last
Awesome.
this today actually. So
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. It was really nice to meet the both of you.
same. And if you have anybody has a story they'd like to share, definitely send them our way. You can share the Instagram if you would like, so we can have more people on our show.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you. Have
care.
a good day. Nice to meet
Yeah,
you.
you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.